Welcome to the Industrial Athletic Trainers Society Continuing Education Program On-Demand Series. We're excited to have you join us and dive into this tailored content created just for you. Whether you're looking to expand your knowledge, sharpen your skills, or stay current with the latest industry insights, you've come to the right place. Our On-Demand series allows you to learn at your own pace, anytime, anywhere. Stick around until the end for important instructions on how to claim your on-demand continuing education credit. Thanks for choosing the Industrial Athletic Trainers Society. Let's get started.
There we go. All right. So welcome everybody. My name is Mike. I'm the Chair of Education for the Industrial Athletic Training Society. I appreciate you all being here today for members and non-members. With our program, right, we like to provide industrial AT specific continuing education programs. Today we are blessed to have Joshua Cloud here from ErgoScience. So go ahead and introduce him, and then I'll turn it over. And if we have questions or whatnot, we'll have folks monitoring the chat. And at the very end of the presentation and in the syllabus that was sent out, we have how you can claim your CEU when you're done. But we'll go over that again at the end of the presentation. So to get started, we've got Joshua Cloud here, right? He's the Director of Operations for ErgoScience, where he leads the development and implementation of injury reduction programs for employers. Prior to joining ErgoScience, Josh spent over a decade working as a clinical exercise physiologist in Alabama's largest hospital systems. He's helped patients with chronic diseases and disabilities and improving their health and quality of life through exercise and lifestyle changes. Josh earned his master's degree in exercise physiology from the University of South Alabama, and a lifelong Alabama resident. He enjoys outdoor activities like hunting and fishing. He currently resides in Birmingham, Alabama with his spouse. So Josh, thank you again so much for being here today. We appreciate your time, and if you go ahead and take it over.
Yeah, appreciate that, Michael. I want to make this slideshow a little bit bigger, so hopefully it's easier for you guys to see. So give me just a moment. Everybody still see that okay? Or Michael, can good. Okay, awesome. I don't have any disclosures other than that I do work for ErgoScience. We play in a lot of the same sandboxes that maybe some of you as industrial athletic trainers do. So I'll tell you a little bit about what ErgoScience does if you don't know already, and then get into more of the presentation, and also some of the objectives. I'll say up front, though, I will apologize. I have gotten a cold over the last 2 days, so if I have to quickly get off the camera or mute myself, it's because I need a drink of water or something like that. So if that happens, just talk amongst yourselves, and I'll be back on as quickly as I can. So like I said, ErgoScience, we are what we call injury prevention experts, or we like to be self-proclaimed injury prevention experts. How ErgoScience began was the owner of our company, Deborah Lechner. She was working at the University of Alabama at Birmingham, and she was developing a research-based FCE protocol. Back in the early 90s, they were doing FCEs for return to work and disability claims. But she describes it as the wild, wild west of everybody was kind of doing their own thing, and there was nothing that was repeatable. And that also could be more of an objective measure of someone's status that could be applied across all different patient populations, ages, races, all of those things. So she developed this protocol and then spun it off into a business. As she became more well-known in the work comp and clinic industry, she was having employers come to her and say, hey, we're seeing a lot of injuries. Is there anything you think you could do on the, hiring side or before they become injured to help us reduce some of those injuries? And so that's where ErgoScience began to grow in the early to mid 2000s. And so as of now, the biggest part of what we do is partner with employer clients that have physically demanding jobs. And we try to come up with ways to make sure, that their people are healthy, that they are hiring the right people, that once they are hired, that they're less likely to become injured. And so there's a lot of services, and everybody has a different need. And you guys know, as you're working with these different programs, there's a lot of different ways that you have to approach injury prevention, injury reduction, hazard analysis, all of those things. So today I'm going to be talking about the role of the athletic trainer, the industrial athletic trainer, in return to work decisions as it relates to cardiac patients, what your role is in educating them to help to reduce the risk of heart disease, and then evaluating the effectiveness of some sort of cardiac rehab type program. What would you do? How could you make that a part of some of the things that you're doing with some of your employer clients? So that's what we're hopefully going to be getting into today. So cardiovascular events, why is it important? Why do we need to pay attention to it? It is and has been the leading cause of death ever since I've taken any of the classes that I have. And every time I look up the statistics, it's still cardiovascular events that is the leading cause of death in the United States. Cardiovascular disease is very prevalent. The location of ErgoScience is Birmingham, Alabama. So what you would consider the deep South. So lots of fried food and unfortunate sedentary people that we see around here. So lots of cardiovascular disease, people having heart attacks at younger and younger ages. Some of the 2022 statistics were that 1 in every 5 deaths was related to heart disease. And, heart disease, everybody kind of thinks of it as the big ones, the heart attacks, the stents, the open heart surgeries. That's eventually what people get to. But what we see is that cardiovascular disease is a disease that is something that begins early in life, from the decisions that we begin to make about what we eat and how often we exercise and the type of stressors that are in our lives. Blockages in your heart don't happen overnight. They don't get fixed overnight. And so we do see a lot. When I was working at UAB's cardiac rehab program, saw a lot of very young men and women who were having heart attacks. Sometimes we see that those heart attacks are not the typical chest pain with your left arm and jaw that aches, especially in the female population. They don't have those typical symptoms. But 1 in 5 heart attacks are silent, and they're not caught until later down the road when someone's going for a follow-up appointment and they do a routine 12-lead EKG, and that cardiac damage shows up on that EKG. And it's really the prevalence of it, talking about young people, seeing young men in their early to mid-30s having full-blown heart attacks is kind of one of the scary things that kind of makes you wake up to the reality of how prevalent this is. We do a lot of work in the trucking industry, working with over-the-road and flatbed companies. And so we attend a lot of the conferences that they put on, and some of the regional and national conferences. And they did a study about the health of their drivers not long ago. And it was a self-report. And so they asked them how prevalent they thought high blood pressure was, or, did they report that they had high blood pressure? And only 40% of the people who responded said that they had high blood pressure, whether it was controlled or not. The statistics show, though, that about 80% of the population is suffering from some sort of hypertension, whether it's undiagnosed or underdiagnosed. And that's why it's called the silent killer, is because it doesn't really start to show up in people. There's not a whole lot of symptoms associated with high blood pressure until you get to this, the point where you may have a heart attack or open heart surgery. And it's a huge financial burden. It's hundreds of billions of dollars every single year to the healthcare system for just cardiovascular disease. So the reasons behind why this is so important and the role that industrial athletic trainers could play is all of the things you see here on this slide. This, by the way, will be the busiest slide that I have. I don't like busy slides. I don't like a lot of information on slides. I just like to talk through, make things a little bit more organic. But I want to stop here because people can easily get distracted or not paying attention. So I'm going to see if you're paying attention. Think about some ways that you, in either your work or your personal life, have encountered someone with cardiovascular disease? In what ways have you supported them? And, in what ways did it affect you or the company, the productivity of the person that you were interacting with? You can put it in the chat, or if you want to speak up, I'll let our moderators kind of help me with that if anybody wants to chime in.
I'll jump in. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
I've maybe not taken cardiovascular health as serious as I had after an event I experienced a handful of years ago on site at a plant. It was a cardiac emergency, and it was pretty scary for everybody involved. It was my first big one. Thankfully the employee turned out to be okay, but it was a very, very close call. And a lot of the population at that plant, unfortunately, was very similar in the fact that they weren't very healthy. They didn't have access to resources and education, a lot of the same nutritional patterns. And that kind of helped me develop some thoughts around educating them as a professional and taking it more serious from like an educator perspective.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I'm sorry that I can't see your name because none of these names are popping up. Do you mind telling me who you are?
Oh, Lex.
Oh, it's Lex. I appreciate you sharing that with us. Yeah, it's when you've experienced that for the first time, that medical emergency that's related to a cardiovascular event, it's scary. I mean, it's scary anytime you have to be a first responder to an emergency, but there's those feelings of kind of some helplessness, and then you then quickly switch to, okay, what's my training? What do I need to do? And so that can be the wake-up call that you experience. And unfortunately, in our world, it's not just in this one, we're much more reactive than we are proactive when it comes to making changes. But hopefully that's what we can get out of this talk as well.
Josh, there's some more comments in the chat. I know you can't see them. It says, education, encouraging people to find a PCP and keep up their annual visits, providing blood pressure checks and wellness information. We just launched a healthy heart program for February.
Awesome.
Encouraging movement, posting heart healthy information, encouraging conversations. Oh, there's a lot of them in here. And education during new hire and wellness teams, and then on-site blood pressure checks. And Tina has her hand up. Go ahead, Tina.
Thanks, Patty. So similar with what Lex said, I had a event at my site, and it was kind of the final push for the site to realize, hey, we should train our employees on basic CPR, AED usage. So that was, unfortunately, like you said, reactive, but a plus because the employees really wanted that training on site. So
yeah, that's huge. That is a big thing too with training, because in some of these industries, you talk about, warehousing, it can be a massive plant that you're in. So if you're on one end and the emergency's on the other, time matters. When somebody has a heart attack or goes into cardiac arrest, the faster you respond, the mortality rate goes down. So you guys are the squeaky wheel when it comes to supporting change and affecting change when it comes to cardiovascular health. So thank you for sharing that. Anything else? I don't know if we got through the chat, or we can move on.
Yeah, I think we pretty much covered it. There's some people doing some really good stuff here, education and blood pressure checks.
That is really good. It is definitely good. And a lot of the things that you mentioned are things that we're going to talk about in this PowerPoint, and that's not a bad thing. It's just a reinforcement that you're doing the right thing. So, the reason we do this is for our people. And when you talk about not only the mortality rate that is there, but one of the phrases that we use here at Ergo Science is that we care about the employee from hire to retire. And if you're caring about them from the very beginning to the time that they're retiring and hopefully retiring healthy. There's a lot that goes into that, but you're doing it not only for the health of that person, but also for the productivity of the workforce. When we talk about warehousing and logistics and trucking, the reason we're able to go to the grocery store and buy what we buy and get what we get and that the shelves are stocked is because of all of those industries. So it does trickle down and it affects us. It affects pricing, but at the same time, it also affects these people. If they're injured or some sort of event happens and they're out of work, statistics show that they are about their level of ability to make more money over the next 10 years is reduced by 15%. So they're missing out on raises, bonuses, growth opportunities. And it's not on purpose, it's just what happens. So imagine if you didn't get a 10% raise next year, or imagine if you didn't get a 10 or 15% bump in your pay over the next 5 to 10 years. It would affect you and it would affect your family. So it's important. And those cardiac events that happens, cardiac rehab, which is where I began, where I cut my teeth in the clinical world, it is one of the most underutilized services that hospitals have. People who are eligible for cardiac rehab, it's still less than 30% utilization rate nationwide. Now compare that to all the other things that people they do post-injury, like return to play and physical therapy and following up with their doctor. Those things aren't perfect, but if it was the 20-ish% that we see in cardiac rehab, we'd see much more. We'd see much worse outcomes. And it's hard. It's not exactly like mental health, but it's an injury you can't see. And so when somebody has a cardiac event, they've had a heart attack, they've had open heart surgery, that person walking down the street, you can't see it. But if they break their foot, right? If it's an external injury, it's something you can see. And so it's hard and it's kind of out of sight, out of mind. But in order to come up with these programs and implement them and even convince the people that you're working with on site that this needs to happen, not only do you have to understand the prevalence of that disease, but you have to help them understand the impact it has on return to work decisions and why it's so important for it to be monitored. There be a program in place and something for them to do, because there are a lot of really smart people with a lot of money that have tried to change that utilization rate. And the American Heart Association has this Million Hearts initiative that they've been working on for the last, 7 years or so. And their goal is to get to 70%. And they're making some strides, but it's still very, 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 very low. And so these people are showing up, right? They're showing up to your jobs, they're showing back up to work because the cardiac surgeon or the interventionist has said they're good to go. We see that even when it comes to coming back to work after a musculoskeletal injury. The surgeon will look at them and say, yep, good range of motion. Surgery went well, don't see anything. You're good to go back to work. How effective is that most of the time? You don't have to answer. In my experience, and you may disagree, but it's not a very effective analysis. People and doctors don't take into account how difficult some of these jobs are, how physically demanding some of them are. And so they're making decisions that they need to have a little bit more information, and you're the next line of defense for that. So when we talk about comprehensive assessments, this is the approach that ErgoScience takes. Job demands analysis, sometimes called job hazard analysis, or any number of other things, is the foundation of making sure that you understand what are the physical requirements for that job. If it's done well and if it's done holistically, it ensures legal compliance for all of the changes that you want to make, because you're quantifying how physically demanding the job is in an objective way. You're measuring heights, you're measuring weights, you're measuring percent of day that a person is doing a particular task or movement. And so those things are super helpful. And then looking at a risk assessment, utilizing technology. Some of this AI technology that they have to help quantify hazards and do some quicker RULA and REBA type assessments are good because you can identify the physical risks of individual tasks and attack the ones that you know you can affect change on. And measuring physical abilities as well, it's important because when you're looking at trying to do a functional capacity evaluation, if that's what's needed for a return to work decision or a return to work type test, you can match that analysis with what that person needs particularly. You need to know what aerobic capacity is. I was an instructor in the Department of Kinesiology at the University of Mobile for a couple of years. And the majority of my students were pre-athletic training students. And I drilled aerobic capacity in their head because I was like, you guys are going to need to know this. It's going to come back up. It's going to be things that you need to remember. And so my students, hopefully, they probably come across that in their work sometimes and go, I remember that crazy professor who taught us X-Phys and said, hey, I remember that stuff. Well, at least that's my hope, right? But the other thing that you could do in partnering with your local cardiac rehab program or hospital is looking at cardiac rehab summaries. If somebody actually has gone through a cardiac rehab program, ask them about it, get some feedback, see what their results were. And if not, at least reviewing medical records and understanding what their diagnosis, their restrictions are, trying to quantify really where they are before they return to work. And so then once you have the information, once you've gathered that, now you're trying to build a bridge back to work. A lot of these companies are looking to make sure people come back to work safely. They want them back to work quickly, but they sometimes have to come back to work on modified duty. So coming up with a plan and saying, hey, this person is not quite there, but we can take some steps in order to get that person there, partnering with your local physical therapy clinic to do work conditioning or work hardening. If you have the space, coming up with a good work conditioning or work hardening program in order to get people back. Referring back to, do you know what their functional capacity is? Adapting the work environment. It's not always possible. Adapting the work environment sometimes means that you have to actually make engineering changes. Engineering changes are expensive, but at least knowing the plant well, getting out there and seeing what's going on. If you have that ability, I highly suggest that you're doing that on a regular basis. And then track your progress. It's not implement one time and everything's perfect. Track and see what's going on. Get some subjective summaries and analysis from your people to see how well they're improving. And then taking the challenges that you're seeing and to leadership and to the people who can affect change and say, hey, this is what we did. This is what we're seeing. This is what I recommend. In every organization, you can always find the person that's data-driven. The owner of our company is extremely data-driven. So if I want to make a change in what we're doing, if I can provide enough data and it makes sense to make the change, I'm much more likely to get it through than if I just say, hey, this is a problem, and I don't give any more information than that. So some of you gave some really good ideas about what you're already doing and the plans that you're making. And somebody mentioned, I think it was Lex, that, providing resources, finding resources for people, knowing and helping them with an exercise plan, nutrition, weight management, smoking cessation, which is huge, stress management, which I underline because it's important. And then coming up with a plan to review yourself, your work, and your people to see what's going on. So exercise, it's important. I'm an exercise physiologist. I don't exercise near as much as I need to, but at least I know what effects it has and that it's good for you. And all of you who, whether you're an exercise guru and a nerd and you love to go to the gym, or you just kind of keep a healthy lifestyle, you know that you feel better when you exercise. If you're ever down in the dumps or not feeling well, you know that, or if you're in a bad mood, you know that if you go exercise it has a positive impact on your mood and your outlook. So recommend to people healthy activity levels for them. But in order to know about those healthy levels, you have to know what a MET level is. And if you're having flashbacks and nightmares of MET levels from ex-phys class, that's okay. We won't get into the details of it. But remember, MET levels are the things that are a measurement of the physical activity and the energy requirement of our bodies. It's a form of indirect calorimetry, because calorimetry is the measure of how many calories it takes to do a particular task. And we do it indirectly by measuring the amount of oxygen that a person is consuming. And it's important to know not only what those MET levels are for what somebody's doing, and you can look at charts like I have here on the screen. They're available all over the internet to show you what ranges and what activities fall into different MET categories. But you also need to remember what people can do and what maybe their aerobic capacity is. Most people in moderately trained and untrained people can maintain 30% of their max MET level throughout the day. So think about that. 30% of your max MET level is what you can do and sustain throughout your day without becoming overly physically tired. One of the experiences that I got to do when I was at UAB was work with post-COVID and long COVID patients. And you would see that their aerobic capacity was very limited because of the damage that had occurred to their lungs. And so their maximum aerobic capacity might only been about 6 or 7 METs at the time. And so just for them, 30% of their MET level was just walking at a leisurely pace. It was 500 feet from the parking lot up to the cardiac rehab program. So they were already going well above their 30% MET level just to get into the room. And so you extrapolate that out and you apply it to what you're seeing with your people. When somebody has a cardiovascular event, a heart attack, damage to their heart, their ability to pump blood, utilize oxygen is affected. And so therefore their MET levels are affected as well. So it has to be personalized. It's not one size fits all. And you have to monitor it and make sure that it's working for that person. And figuring out, just like you and I, you know, we're professionals, we're busy. So are they. Figuring out how to incorporate exercise into their daily life. And remember the rule that all exercise is physical activity, but not all physical activity is exercise. Just because you're busy at work and just because you're on your feet at work, it does not take the place of a structured exercise program. And nutrition, you know, providing resources, all the things that they need to know. And everybody has a different opinion on nutrition, but the one that I know that is true, it's the thing that our nutrition professor told us in grad school. It really is mainly about, it's not only about calories in and it's calories out. And the other thing that you have to remember, even though there's some modifications that you have to make to that calorie statement, is that nutrition is really the only reason why we eat. It's just to fuel ourselves. We get so hung up on the things we like and we don't like. Sometimes you need to eat just to get the fuel. Not everybody likes kale or Brussels sprouts or certain types of fruit, but you've got to incorporate those healthy things into your life in order to make sure that you're eating well and fueling your body. I say this to myself all the time when I want to go across the street and get a sandwich or a hamburger. It's like, no, you need to eat a salad because it won't kill you. You know, yeah, you want a burger, but the salad will get you through too. Yeah, and then looking at risk factors, you know, smoking, we all know its effects and how bad it is and how hard it is to quit. Weight management is very, very important, and stress. And that's really where, you know, there's all sorts of stress. Sometimes stress is good for you, but for the most part, stress, whether it's physical, mental, emotional stress causes inflammation in the body. And that inflammation, more than all the other things that we see, is what is contributing to a lot of hypertension and other cardiovascular disease. And there was a phrase when I was working in rehab we used for people that sitting is the new smoking. Sitting is bad for us, right? I'm sitting in this chair here, and if I'm not careful, I can sit here for 2 to 3 hours without realizing it. Thankfully, my Apple Watch tells me, reminds me every 45 minutes to stand up and move. But sitting, and you guys work with people who are in an office setting, giving them resources on what it takes to get up and move and remember to not be sitting so long. And then even just mindfulness and positivity, self-care. It's so important. And, there's people who have differing opinions on how you implement that. But as a society, I think we're probably a lot more negative than we are positive. Our thinking is more negative. When we see a problem, we look at it as a problem rather than an opportunity. And it's hard to make that switch. It's hard to flip it so that anytime you see a problem, it's like, oh, this is an opportunity for me to do something, rather than, oh no, it's one more thing on my plate. And little things like that can help. And then I heard some people mention blood pressure monitoring, cholesterol monitoring, regular checkups. Another person mentioned making sure people have a primary care physician. If a person has insurance, that annual wellness visit, for the most part, is free. It's just the time it takes. So encouraging people to do that, and encouraging the companies that you work with to allow people to go to these annual checkups to make sure that they're healthy. Them being out of work for a couple of hours is going to be way better than the potential side effects of some of the other chronic diseases that can affect them if they're not taken care of. And I put on this word here, collaborate. Collaborate with the physicians. Develop a relationship with the physicians in your area, with the PT programs in your area, with the cardiac rehab programs in your area. This is what is called the continuum of care. And just because you're not in a healthcare setting, if you're working in these plants, because you are a healthcare professional, you're part of that continuum, and you're the one who has the ability to monitor and to make the changes and to develop the programs that keep these people healthier. Data, it's important. It drives what all programs and all successful programs do. So when you're building out your program, figure out upfront what data you want to collect, what surveys you want to send, what assessments are necessary in order to collect that data, and set benchmarks. All these resources are out there, especially with AI. If you go to Google or Edge, every time you type something into the search bar, it's AI driven now, and you get those wonderful summaries. And it's not perfect, but it's there. And it can help you with the resources that you need to develop a program. And then again, bridge that gap. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. Someone already has. So most programs would be happy to share their wealth of knowledge with you and help you, and maybe collaborate in ways that when people do need the help, that there's some sort of way you're communicating with them about what to do. Again, these programs, they're not really built overnight, and success is not built overnight. That's something for you to understand up front, but it's important to communicate that with the employees that you're working with. They didn't get the heart disease that they have because they made a bad decision last week with what they ate or the cigarette they smoked. It's cumulative, and so it's going to take a while for it to get better. Oh, excuse me. I knew this was going to happen towards the end. And that's really the end of my presentation. You guys were great about coordinating with me and communicating with me up front, but I'm hoping you guys have some more questions about some of the things that I've brought to the table.
Lexi, go ahead.
Hey, I just had a question, to pick your brain and maybe anyone else on the call on the impact of sleep in, you're talking about education and resources and It's especially with like shift workers and, naturally as adults, we probably don't get enough sleep in general, but I feel like there's some studies and stuff out there I've seen over the years, but I didn't know if anyone had anything specific to add with the effects of sleep and preventing cardiac conditions and stuff like that.
Yeah, sleep is a huge thing. Sorry, I unmuted so I could cough and not be coughing into you guys' ear. The lack of sleep is a stressor, and the statistics do show that people who work night shifts and who work late shifts, their all-cause mortality is much higher than those who work during the day. And so not only the effects of lack of sleep, but also people who have sleep apnea. And that's not something that I brought up during my presentation, but one of the biggest risk factors for cardiovascular disease is sleep apnea. And, the people say, well, it's people who are bigger and have, the larger neck circumference and things like that. But I have met people who are in wonderful shape, who work out, and very muscular young people who still suffer from sleep apnea. And so there are some resources out there. There's some at-home sleep apnea testing that is coming out and being approved by the FDA. So that could be some resources to tap into. But that's a education piece and a resource that you need to get to your people to understand. We're over caffeinated as a society. We're overstressed as a society, and all those things lead to lack of sleep and poor sleep. Alcohol as well. That prevalence of alcohol consumption has increased dramatically since COVID and we were at home. But alcohol doesn't help you sleep better. And it really affects blood sugar. It affects your circadian rhythm. And so all of those things need to be taken into account and educated. But maybe some other people on the call have other ideas and resources.
Somebody else had their hand up and it's disappeared right now. Go ahead if you had your hand up. Yes, Jimmy.
Hi. I just want to say thank you guys for the presentation. I want to thank the society for providing this education, and I caught you guys on social media for what it's worth, and I'm really appreciative of having some more education here. I just wanted to briefly touch on, I think I work with injured construction workers, and when we, for example, when I was a situation where a gentleman is experiencing some orthopedic related issues, but also reported chest pain, but has a history of cardiac, concerns, and maybe not taking their medications and things like that. And so whether it's work related or non-work related, either way, at the end of the day, we want to help, our patients and, improve their health and educate. So I, did get them over to urgent care, with high blood pressure, and I think we're talking like 180 over 110, somewhere about there. I'm just curious about in situations like those where maybe it isn't necessarily a work-related issue, what are the recommendations, maybe outside of that? Maybe like you said, an education program, blood pressure. What are suggestions you may have as far as now creating some sort of awareness and some sort of evaluation or protocol to kind of just really be ahead of the curve?
That's a really good question, Jimmy. And I think it comes back to probably first getting the support of leadership within the company that you work in. Because unfortunately, a lot of companies are just more concerned about their bottom dollar than they are the health of their employee. And if you work with a company that's not like that, that's awesome. But you have to convince them to allow the resources to be provided. But you also have to convince them that, when someone's experiencing X, Y, and Z, to take time out of their day and to provide a resource for them to be able to go to urgent care or see a primary care or see an occupational health nurse to get something like that that's not really work related is huge. And so you'll need their support. But then there are also a lot of companies, and there's some apps out there that you could use to build this yourself, is just creating a wellness program. I mean, prevention is a huge thing. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So if you can come up with ways to prevent through a proactive wellness program, yes, there's a cost to that. There's a cost to incentivize people to do that. But I've seen the numbers on what a person who has to have a, double bypass and they're in the hospital for 4 or 5 days and go home, which 4 or 5 days is now crazy fast, but we are seeing that. But you're talking about 6 figures. And even if it's not going directly to the company, those lost time and restricted duty days are really going to be the biggest effect that it has on the company, because that person is going to be out for 4 to 6 weeks. So who's going to fill that spot? And that's the conversation you have to have with leadership to try to get them to understand it. Yes. And Michael, thank you. If you want somebody on your team, talk to HR. They're hard to convince, but once you get them on your side, they're good. The recruiting expense, those other indirect costs of recruiting and training, it is much better to spend the money on prevention, to spend the money on some of those incentives than it is to train a whole new person to do a job.
Thank you.
Chris.
Hey, what would be an under-recognized sign, symptom, something you come across in the workplace, something that you've got the typical chest pain, aching left arm and jaw. I know women have some different signs, maybe have some upper back issues. What would be something to look out for, not necessarily for an active event, but to really raise awareness with an individual that you've come across with some kind of concerns?
The number one thing I heard from people, and it's difficult because could go back to caffeine or lack of hydration, is headaches. People who have high blood pressure, they experience chronic headaches. They also experience chronic fatigue. When they have the stress type symptoms of having the pain in the back of their head and down their shoulders, whether it's the cause or, which came first, the chicken or the egg, more than likely their blood pressure is going to be elevated. And so sometimes it's more about the input that is going to tell you that somebody's having high blood pressure, because they do smoke, they drink too much caffeine, they don't drink enough water, and you're seeing some of these symptoms. But I would say headaches, fatigue, neck and shoulder pain. It's not a one-to-one correlation, but those would be ones I'd look out for.
Especially just with idiopathic causes, I'm sure.
Absolutely. And fatigue's a weird thing, everybody's tired. It's Friday, right? Everybody's tired, but it's a different type of fatigue. It's a fatigue that is not cured by rest. And I guess that's the training resource, is having people be self-aware of what to pay attention to and how to self-evaluate that. And then just being aware and knowing that, hey, go down to Walgreens, stick your arm in that blood pressure machine and get your blood pressure taken. Go to the local fire station and get your blood pressure taken. And if it's great, awesome. But there's no cost to it. It's just your time. Amazon has blood pressure cuffs for $30. And even if people can't afford them, there's resources for free ones out there.
I actually have a question myself about this. We had an incident at my company, and we're utilities. So our employees are outside and they're all over the place, at where an employee was lightheaded and they called one of our staff to see them. And then it was documented that he had AFib, but they keep asking our staff to monitor their blood pressure with no protocol to deal with it. So I guess I'm asking for, if you have a protocol in place, any of you, to say your blood pressure is at this level, we're going to take you out of work today, or we have to, is there an action step? But I guess I was frustrated because I felt like they were asking us to take the blood pressure, but what for? Because we didn't have the power or a protocol to take them out. So if you have a protocol at your site where you remove someone from the job, just give it a little thumbs up. I'd like to know out of the 43 people on this call if you have that. Michael has it. And but so we're still, there's a lot of room to grow here as far as how we manage this. And what's normal blood pressure for one person is not normal for another. So we're not cardiologists. So it's, and when they have strenuous jobs, that's a challenge. So, well, you can see there's 42 people on the call and Michael was the one to give the thumbs up. So it looks like there's a lot of growth that can be done by all of us.
Yeah, and to be honest with you, the protocol probably wasn't the most comprehensive. The one that I'm referring to, you have like the different classifications of hypertension, and if anyone was in the hypertension class 2, our EAP really called out, not necessarily like the HR, where we would be required to activate EMS. And then if they didn't want to leave, they had to sign like the declination form, and then we would keep a copy. But you're right, like when it comes to us being able to tell them like you have to go home, like that'd be something we'd have to go to HR and then convince them to pay them for the rest of their day, because we didn't have that level of, like you said, we're not cardiologists. So that's just something to like to call out.
There's a little irony. We can send them to the med station to get, recommend outside care referral if they need stitches, but not if they're having a cardiac event. So we can always implement call the 911, but for that little gray area in the middle, it's a challenge. So it's one person wrote in here, my location, Katie says, my location has an EMT on site, but during the hiring process, we will deny a person from completing the physical ability tests, and they would be reschedule it if their blood pressure. And then Tina has her hand up. Go ahead, Tina.
Yeah, Patty. So at one of my sites, we had an issue where I recognized that there was something serious going on. The employee was still conscious, but they were very much like, I don't want your help. I'm just going to go home and sleep it off. And we tried to get HR involved, and ultimately the company threw their hands up and said, hey, we can't stop this person from leaving. And we called our on-site security, who also said, hey, we can't stop this person. And again, I was super worried about it. But what ended up happening, because of the fear of the employee having a cardiac event on the way home or at home, is we actually called the fire department. And the fire department interjected with them on our property and convinced them to get into AMR to the hospital. I see, Chris, you said have them sign a declination. We did that as well. But thankfully, the firefighters convinced him to go, because when he got to the hospital, he was diagnosed with a brain aneurysm.
Yeah,
but that's another idea. Call the fire department.
No, it's a great idea. And that's why you don't always think of every situation, but that's why you have a policy, procedure, emergency action plan, because sometimes those situations come up. That policy needs to be revised, and you follow the policy regardless of what they do and what they want. That's easier said than done sometimes, but yes, can they leave on their own? Sure. But do you have a responsibility? And you're a clinician, so you're never going to really let it go. You can't sleep at night if you let it go. But yeah, I think covering your bases and making sure that you exhaust all your resources is the best way to go about it. And Patty, I want to go and speak back to the AFib thing. Blood pressure is very important when it comes to somebody who has AFib. but heart rate control may edge that out a little bit more. Basically, if depending on the medications that the person is on to control their AFib, that can affect their heart rate. And a lot of cardiovascular physicians will put restrictions on what their heart rate should be based on how severe their AFib is and things like that. So they don't want it to be too slow. They don't want it to be too fast. But like you said, blood pressure is pretty variable when it comes to what's best or what is good for each individual person. It's more heart rate and symptom based in my experience.
And I feel like there's some competing goals here because we have a strong union where I work, and the union people will want to protect the employee and not have them red flagged because a lot of them have CDLs and a lot of them. So I'm like, okay, so you don't want them to get care, but they're trying to give the employee every opportunity to stay at work. Like you were talking about at the beginning, it's a dollars and cents things to that employee. He needs to be at work so he can get paid. And so we're doing better with some supervisors creating light work days and those kind of things so that, and you know, they all know what an OSHA recordable is as well, and they don't want to be one. So they're trying to get around some of those things, which is not necessarily in the best interest of the employee, obviously, which her case illustrates.
Yeah, that's tough when you have those competing interests. It can definitely make it a little bit more challenging, and you're kind of like standing in the corner, jumping up and down like, hey, but what about this? But at the end of the day, they're worried about what it looks like and the bottom dollar.
So taking a look at time, definitely love the conversations here. If it's okay, I'll take maybe just one more question if anyone's got one. If not, then I'll ask the final question, but I'll give it to someone if someone has anything out there. All right. So Josh, again, thank you so much. The last question I always like to ask is, you know, going through all these questions, going through the content that you delivered for us, if you had to pick one thing that you want athletic trainers to remember, I know that's probably really difficult based on what you covered, but if you had to pick one thing, what was one thing you want us to all remember from this?
You know, I barely mentioned it, so it probably should have been something I mentioned more, but remember your training. I think that's the most important piece of this. Remember your education, remember your training. All of the things you need to do, the policies, EAPs that need to be written, they fall back on what you learned in school and how you were trained. And if you remember that, I think that is the foundation you can stand on for affecting change in your workplace.
This concludes the IATs On Demand Continuing Education Program video. To claim your CU, you must be a member of the Industrial Athletic Trainers Society and complete the form Claim Your CU found in the YouTube description. If you have any interest in learning more about what the Education Committee has to offer, reach out to the email address on your screen. If you would like to volunteer your time to speak on a topic that interests you, please reach out. Thank you and stay safe.